The sound of Oliver Moore's steady footsteps echoed down the impeccably organized halls of the mansion. Every click of his shoes on the marble floor reflected not only the power he held over every corner of the property, but also the coldness and relentless control he imposed on everyone around him. From the highest-ranking executives in his multinational company to the lowest-ranking maids, no one dared to challenge him. Until that moment. Anna, a young woman with a sincere smile and delicate movements, was crossing the hallway with a tray in her hands, balancing finely decorated porcelain cups. She was one of the new employees and, at that moment, one of the only people in the mansion who hadn't yet experienced her boss's temper. Oliver, unaware of her presence, turned the corner hastily, colliding violently with the tray. The cups and saucers crashed to the floor in a deafening clatter. Oliver's gaze fixed on Anna, cold and piercing. There was a hint of irritation in his eyes, but also something more, something he was unaccustomed to seeing in his employees, an unexpected firmness. Anna didn't lower her gaze, didn't step back, nor did she look away. Instead, she lifted her head and met his eyes, making it clear she wouldn't be intimidated so easily. "Who are you, and how dare you cross my path so clumsily?" he asked, his tone icy, almost cutting. Anna took a deep breath, steadying the trembling in her hands, and replied in a firm voice, "I'm Anna, sir, the new maid. I apologize for the incident." Oliver raised an eyebrow, as if weighing every word that left her lips. He was used to being revered, to seeing fear in others' eyes. But there, in those brown eyes, he found something different, a spark of pride and dignity. "If you expect to work here, Miss Anna, I suggest you learn to move with more caution. This is a house of rules and order, not chaos," he declared, turning his back on her. But as he walked away, something within him shifted. Oliver felt a slight unease, something he tried to ignore. Perhaps it was the way she didn't let herself be intimidated, or the quiet strength that seemed to radiate from her. He shook his head impatiently. What nonsense, he thought. She's just another employee, one to be replaced at any moment. Yet Oliver's heart, against all odds, knew that this would be the first of many times he'd cross paths with that woman, and perhaps the impact she would have would be greater than he imagined. The next morning, Anna had already decided her focus would be to keep her distance from Oliver Moretti. Last night's incident in the hallway had left her both nervous and determined. Working for someone like him meant finding the strength and patience to endure that superior, authoritarian air he seemed to carry with every word. However, as she walked down the hallway leading to her boss's office, she felt a familiar shiver as she glanced at the massive carved wooden door. Inside that office, the most feared man in the mansion spent hours isolated, surrounded by piles of documents and endless phone calls, yet without ever losing control. As Anna crossed the hallway, the office door suddenly opened. She hesitated, unsure if she should hurry away or pretend she hadn't noticed his presence. To her surprise, Oliver was watching her intently, yet his gaze was different from the one the day before. "Miss Anna, come in for a moment," he said, his voice controlled, without a hint of the impatience from before. She paused, a little surprised by the invitation, but knew that refusing would be unwise. Taking a deep breath, she entered the room where the walls lined with shelves filled with books gave an almost intimidating austerity. Oliver gestured toward a chair in front of his desk, then sat down, resting his hands on a stack of papers. He didn't look away, but this time there was no coldness in his gaze. There was instead a trace of curiosity. "How long have you been working here?" he asked, still in that reserved tone, as if this information might reveal something important. "1 week, sir," Anna replied, struggling to keep her voice steady despite her nerves. Oliver raised an eyebrow as if weighing every word that left her lips. He was used to being revered, to seeing fear in others' eyes. But there, in those brown eyes, he found something different, a spark of pride and dignity.
Question, but Anna didn't seem to fit that mold. "I hope you'll be more careful from now on. My tolerance is limited," he declared, almost as a warning, but his gaze softened slightly. "And if you need anything, contact the housekeeper." She simply nodded, fighting the urge to make a sarcastic comment about his limited tolerance. As she stood to leave, she felt Oliver's gaze on her back, the weight of that attention making her shiver for reasons she couldn't understand. Closing the office door behind her, she took a deep breath, regaining her composure. She was determined to prove that despite his strict orders and arrogance, she would do her job without giving in to the urge to confront him. Inside, Oliver sighed, irritated at his own momentary weakness. Why had he called her? Why did this young woman, who was nothing more than a maid, have the power to pierce through his wall of coldness and indifference? He returned to his documents, but the words seemed distant, and for the first time in years, Oliver Moretti felt distracted and almost intrigued. The day passed in the heavy silence of the mansion. Anna focused on her household tasks, trying to ignore the memory of the morning in the office. But inevitably, Oliver's words echoed in her mind. She had expected his cold tone. What surprised her was the veiled curiosity she had glimpsed in his gaze. It was late afternoon when she was assigned to organize the rarely used meeting room. As she opened the curtains to let light into the space, she heard firm footsteps approaching her. Her stomach tightened even before Oliver's figure appeared at the door. "It seems Miss Anna is everywhere in this house," he commented, with a faint smile that bordered on sarcasm. Anna stopped what she was doing and turned to face him, maintaining a firm posture. "Just fulfilling the tasks assigned to me, Mr. Moretti." Oliver tilted his head as if analyzing each word she spoke. There was something in Anna's firm, yet polite tone that stirred in him a mix of irritation and fascination. It was rare to find someone in that mansion who dared to maintain composure in his presence. "Tell me, Miss Anna, what brought you to this house?" he asked, taking a few slow steps toward her. She took a deep breath, searching for the right way to respond without revealing too much. The truth was that working in this mansion gave her the chance to support her family, but that wasn't something she intended to share. "I need the job like everyone here," she replied simply. Oliver studied her a moment longer, and for the first time, the silence between them felt unsettling. He was used to deflecting questions and controlling the course of conversations, but there, facing this woman who did not back down, he felt slightly vulnerable. Before he could respond, Anna resumed her work, stepping away to arrange the chairs round the meeting table. Oliver observed her in silence, intrigued by the fact that a simple maid could provoke such an unexpected reaction in someone so accustomed to having everything under control. However, as he left the room, Oliver approached just close enough to say, in a low, enigmatic tone, "Remember, Anna, nothing in this house escapes my notice." She looked up at him, showing not the slightest hint of submission. With a slight smile, she calmly replied, "Good to know, Mr. Moretti." He watched her a moment longer without replying before stepping away. But he felt strangely pleased by her response. There was something in Anna that challenged him, something he couldn't explain. And against all expectations, the billionaire was beginning to admit that perhaps this young woman was an exception in his world of control and coldness. Night had fallen over the Moretti mansion, and Anna was finishing her last shift in the kitchen, organizing utensils and ensuring everything was in order. As she put away the last cups, she heard quiet footsteps approaching. When she turned, she found Oliver standing at the door, watching her with an unreadable expression. The silence between them stretched for a few seconds. Anna, surprised to see him there so late, maintained her composure. Though she knew that Oliver rarely ventured into the kitchen, his unexpected presence made her wonder about his motives. But she chose not to ask. "You're working late, Miss Anna," he remarked, crossing his arms.
With a slight smile, "Just doing what's necessary, sir," she replied calmly. Oliver took a step forward, glancing around the kitchen, but his eyes quickly returned to her, as if he wanted to absorb every detail of her steady posture and controlled expression. The silent proximity created an invisible tension, something both of them felt, but neither dared to mention. "I admire your dedication," he murmured, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "But I wonder, how far does that determination go?" Anna remained firm, despite the clear provocation in his tone. Her gaze met his, determined not to yield. "I'll go as far as necessary, sir, as long as the respect is mutual." Oliver paused, surprised and visibly intrigued. It was rare for anyone to dare set boundaries with him, especially an employee. Her assertiveness disarmed him in an unexpected way, but instead of pulling back, he found himself drawn to this unusual strength. "Respect is something I value deeply, but I also demand absolute loyalty," he replied, his gaze still intense. Anna gave a slight nod, controlling the unease she felt hearing him speak of loyalty as though he were trying to probe her soul. Inside, she fought not to be affected by that look and the energy he emanated. Her determination to remain professional was stronger than any fascination or tension that might arise. After a brief pause, Oliver gave an enigmatic smile. "Very well, Miss Anna. Let's see just how far that loyalty takes you." He slowly stepped away, leaving her alone in the kitchen. Yet Anna still felt the weight of his presence even after he had gone. At that moment, she understood that Oliver was not just an arrogant and distant employer. There was something more to him, something that made her question her own defenses. However, contrary to what he might expect, this only encouraged her to hold her resolve even more firmly. Outside, as he walked back to his office, Oliver felt an unusual restlessness. It wasn't mere curiosity. It was something that pulled at him, something he knew he shouldn't explore, but somehow couldn't resist. With each encounter with Anna, he found himself more captivated, almost challenged to find a way to break down her barriers without realizing that perhaps it was he who was beginning to unravel. The following morning, Anna set about her routine with a renewed determination to avoid Oliver. The memory of their encounter in the kitchen lingered in her mind, not just for his words, but for the way he had looked at her. She shook off the thought, reminding herself that she was here to work, not to be affected by the moods of a powerful, arrogant billionaire. As she dusted the library shelves, she heard the sound of approaching footsteps, distinctive, steady, unmistakable. Her back stiffened instinctively, and before she could move out of sight, Oliver entered the room. "Miss Anna," he greeted, his voice as smooth and controlled as ever. She turned, giving him a polite nod while attempting to keep her gaze steady. "Good morning, Mr. Moretti." There was a pause. Oliver's gaze traveled across the room as if examining every detail, yet his eyes always returned to her. The silence between them was thick, an invisible tension that neither seemed willing to break. After a moment he walked closer, his eyes narrowing as he observed her. "You seem rather focused. Do you enjoy working here?" Anna considered his question carefully, suspecting it was more than just a casual inquiry. "I take my work seriously, sir. I try to do my best." His mouth quirked in what could almost be called a smile. "I've noticed you don't seem intimidated." There was a hint of curiosity, perhaps even admiration, in his voice, and it caught her off guard. Despite her best efforts to remain detached, her heart raced slightly under his gaze. She felt as though he were peeling back layers, trying to see through her composed exterior. "I see no reason to be intimidated, Mr. Moretti. Respect is important, but fear doesn't improve anyone's work." He paused, clearly intrigued. Anna could sense it, could feel the shift in his energy as if he were truly seeing her for the first time beyond her role as an employee. He wasn't used to anyone challenging him with such quiet confidence, and for once, he seemed unsure of what to say. For a moment, it felt as if they were the only two people in the world, as if the mansion
itself held its breath. Then Oliver spoke, his tone unusually soft. "You surprise me, Anna." Anna blinked, her gaze fixed on his, reading the slight vulnerability in his expression. It was subtle, but it was there, a glimpse of someone beneath the cold, aloof exterior. Her own defenses faltered for just a second, and she wondered if perhaps there was more to Oliver than the arrogance and control he wore like armor. Before she could respond, Oliver cleared his throat, the mask slipping back over his features as he straightened. The moment had passed, yet its impact lingered, casting an unspoken understanding between them. Without another word, he turned and left, leaving Anna alone in the silence of the library. She took a steadying breath, realizing with an unsettling clarity that Oliver Moretti was no longer just her employer. He was becoming something more, something that she hadn't been prepared for. As she returned to her work, she felt an awareness settle within her, a sense that the walls she had built so carefully were beginning to crack. Whether she liked it or not, something was shifting between them, drawing them closer in ways neither of them could control. Days passed, and the mansion seemed to grow more oppressive. With each encounter, Anna found herself more aware of Oliver's presence, even when he wasn't speaking to her directly. She couldn't escape the feeling that his eyes were always on her, studying her. It was as if he could see something in her that she wasn't yet ready to face. It was a particularly quiet afternoon when she entered the study to tidy up. As she straightened the papers on the desk, the door opened, and Oliver walked in, his usual composed demeanor in place. She didn't look up immediately, preferring to focus on her task rather than acknowledge the tension in the air. "You seem to be avoiding me lately," he said, his voice low but cutting through the still of the room. Anna's fingers froze on the edge of a folder. She hadn't expected him to bring it up, and for a moment she wondered if he was simply testing her. But there was something in his tone, something not entirely accusatory, but rather curious. "I've been busy, Mr. Moretti," she replied, keeping her voice even. He moved closer, standing just behind her, his presence overwhelming. "Are you telling me the truth, or is there something more?" Anna finally turned to face him, meeting his gaze. "There's nothing more, sir." Oliver's eyes narrowed slightly, but there was no malice in his expression, just a quiet intensity, as though he were trying to understand a riddle that refused to be solved. "Why do you insist on keeping your distance, Anna? You don't have to be so distant with me." Her pulse quickened at his words, and for a brief moment, she found herself struggling to maintain control. She had been avoiding him, yes, but it wasn't just because of his presence in the house. It was because of the emotions he was starting to stir in her. It had nothing to do with being distant out of spite. It was a defense mechanism, one that had kept her from being vulnerable for years. "I'm not distant," she said quietly, her voice betraying none of the inner turmoil she was feeling. "I'm simply focused on my work, Mr. Moretti. That's all." Oliver studied her, his gaze lingering. There was a flicker of something personal behind his eyes, and then, as quickly as it had come, it was gone. He stepped back, running his hand through his frustration. "You think I don't understand that?" he muttered, almost to himself. "You think I don't know what it's like to keep people at a distance?" The sudden vulnerability in his voice caught him off guard. He had never heard him speak like that, never seen him let his guard down, but she wasn't sure if she was ready to confront whatever pain he was hinting at. She took a cautious step toward him. "If it's hard for you to trust people, Mr. Moretti, you're not the only one. I know what it's like to be guarded."
Oliver's eyes flickered toward her, his expression shifting. For a brief moment, it seemed like he was about to say something more, something personal. But then he caught himself. He cleared his throat and straightened, the familiar mask of control slipping back into place. "Guarded," he repeated, with a quiet laugh, though there was no amusement in it.
Not everyone has the luxury of protecting themselves. Anna wanted to ask what he meant by that, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, realizing that Oliver's emotional walls were just as impenetrable as her own. "I'll finish here, Mr. Moretti," she said, picking up the folder she'd been organizing earlier, her hands slightly trembling. Oliver didn't reply right away. For a long moment, he stood there, his gaze fixed on her, as if trying to gauge whether there was more she was hiding. Then, with a final glance, he turned and walked toward the door. As the door closed behind him, Anna let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She was shaken, not just by his words, but by the realization that in some strange way, they were both trapped in the same emotional prison, and neither of them seemed willing to break free. At least, not yet. The days that followed were quieter, yet Anna could sense an undercurrent of tension lingering in the mansion. Oliver had become increasingly elusive, his presence a shadow she couldn't ignore. He seemed to be watching her, but whenever their paths crossed, their conversations were clipped, almost formal, as if he were distancing himself even more after their last encounter. Anna, in turn, tried to bury herself in her work, keeping her head down and avoiding moments where their gazes might meet. Yet despite her efforts, the weight of his presence seemed to press on her, as if he were always nearby, just out of sight. The familiar tension between them had shifted, and Anna wasn't sure whether it made her feel more alive or more on edge. One evening, as she walked down the long hallway toward the kitchen, she heard the unmistakable sound of a door opening, a soft, muted click. Her heart skipped. She turned the corner, and there he was, Oliver, standing by the window of the library, staring out into the darkened grounds. Anna hesitated for a moment before walking toward him, her feet moving almost instinctively. She stopped just a few paces behind him, unsure of what to say. The silence stretched between them, thick and almost unbearable. "You've been avoiding me." Oliver's voice came low and quiet, breaking the silence. Anna's throat tightened. She hadn't expected him to acknowledge it so openly, but here they were, two people circling around something they both refused to name. "I've been focused on my duties, Mr. Moretti," she replied, though her voice lacked the firmness she'd hoped for. There was a vulnerability in her words, and she couldn't help but feel it. "Duties," he repeated, his tone almost bitter. "Is that what you call it? Hiding behind your work?" Anna flinched, her hands curling into fists at her sides. The way he said it, almost accusingly, made her feel exposed. "I'm not hiding. I'm just doing what I came here to do." Oliver turned around to face her. His eyes were darker than usual, his expression unreadable. "You think that's what you're doing? Just doing your job? You don't think there's something more between us? Something you're trying to avoid?" The words hung in the air like a challenge, and for the first time in days, Anna allowed herself to meet his gaze directly. There was an intensity in his eyes, something she hadn't fully acknowledged until now, a rawness that almost made her lose her resolve. "You're wrong," she said, her voice shaking slightly, despite her best efforts. "There's nothing between us. You're my employer and I'm your employee. That's it." Oliver stepped closer, closing the gap between them in an instant. The proximity made her pulse race,
her breath catching in her throat. She told herself to step back, to maintain the distance, but something inside her refused to move. Is that really all it is, Anna? His voice dropped lower, his breath brushing against her cheek as he spoke. Tell me, how can it feel like this then? How can I feel the tension between us every time you look at me? Anna's mind raced, her heart hammering in her chest. She was torn between the part of her that wanted to deny it, to push him away, and the part of her that was already unraveling at his touch, at the weight of his words. I don't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible, her hands clenched at her sides, her nails digging into her palms. Oliver's gaze softened, just for a moment. It was as if he, too, was struggling to hold on to the last shred of resolution. Remnants of control, he reached out slowly, his fingers brushing her arm in a fleeting touch that sent a jolt of electricity through her body. Anna, he murmured, his voice thick with something she couldn't quite name. You don't have to fight this. You don't have to fight me. His words were a quiet admission, and for the first time Anna saw something raw in him, a vulnerability that mirrored her own. She took a shaky breath, stepping back just a little, her mind spinning with 1,000 thoughts. I don't want to fight, she said softly, though she wasn't sure if she was speaking to him or to herself. But I don't know how to navigate this, whatever this is between us. Oliver's gaze lingered on her, intense and searching. Neither do I, he admitted, his voice hushed. But I know one thing for sure, Anna. I can't keep pretending like this means nothing. Anna's breath hitched, and for a brief moment the world seemed to stand still. There was no hiding anymore, no barriers, just the raw truth hanging between them. She started, but before she could say anything else, Oliver stepped forward, his hands gently cupping her face. He leaned in slowly, giving her a moment to pull away if she wanted to, but she didn't. His lips brushed against hers in a soft, tentative kiss, the first sign of something more between them. It was a quiet moment, but it was enough to shatter every last defense she had built. Her hands, which had been tightly clenched by her sides, now found their way to his chest, her heart racing as she kissed him back. The kiss was brief, but it was enough to change everything. As Oliver pulled away slightly, his forehead resting against hers, he whispered, "We can't go back now." Anna closed her eyes, feeling the weight of his words settle in her chest. There was no going back, and as much as she tried to deny it, part of her didn't want to. The next morning, everything seemed to have changed, though neither Anna nor Oliver spoke of the kiss. It lingered between them like an unspoken truth, a fragile thread that connected them in a way neither could deny. Anna tried to keep her focus on her duties. She walked through the mansion as if everything were normal, her movements automatic, but inside her mind was a whirlwind. She had never expected to feel this way, especially not for someone like him. Oliver Moretti was a billionaire, powerful and arrogant, a man who could have anyone at his side. What could he possibly see in her, someone who had lived her life in the shadows, trying to remain invisible? Yet the kiss had been undeniable. His touch had been both possessive and tender, as if he were claiming something that was his to take, but there had been no words, no promises. When she entered the kitchen to prepare breakfast, she noticed Oliver sitting at the table already there, staring at his phone. He didn't look up as she approached, and for a brief moment Anna felt a flicker of uncertainty. Would he pretend it hadn't happened? Would everything return to the way it was before? But as she began setting the table, she felt his gaze on her. It wasn't overt, but it was there, like a subtle pressure against her skin. She didn't look at him, but she knew he was watching her every move. "I hope you slept well," he said, his voice low and casual, as if nothing had transpired the night before. Anna's heart skipped a beat. She didn't know how to respond. His words felt hollow, like he was testing the waters, trying to see how she would react. She forced herself to remain calm, trying to push past the moment that had changed everything. "I slept fine, thank you," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. There was a long pause, the silence stretching between them. Finally, Oliver put his phone down, his eyes finally meeting hers. There was an intensity in his gaze that made her breath catch. "You're avoiding me again," he said, his voice barely a whisper. Anna froze, her heart hammering in her chest. She hadn't realized how much she had been avoiding him until he pointed it out. It wasn't intentional, but it was a defense mechanism she couldn't afford to let herself get too close, not after what had happened. "I'm not avoiding you, Mr. Moretti," she said quietly, though the words felt like a lie. His expression softened for a brief moment, his eyes searching hers as if trying to read her, to figure out what was going on.
Beneath her composed exterior, "I don't think you're being honest with me," he said softly. "I can see it, Anna. You're afraid." Anna stiffened. His words hit too close to home. Was she afraid? Yes. She was afraid of everything. Of him. Of the attraction she felt. Of the consequences. But more than that, she was afraid of losing herself in this. Of losing the control she'd spent so long building. "I'm not afraid of you, Mr. Moretti," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just trying to keep things professional. We can't let this, whatever this is, interfere with the work." Oliver leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. He was studying her, his gaze intense and unwavering. "You think this is just about work?" he asked, his voice low. "You think it's that simple?" Anna opened her mouth to reply, but the words caught in her throat. She didn't know how to explain it, how to make him understand, and she didn't want to be vulnerable, didn't want to admit the truth that there was something between them, something real, even if it scared her. But before she could say anything, Oliver stood up, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. He stopped just a few inches away, his presence towering over her. The air between them crackled with tension, and Anna's heart raced. "You don't get it, do you?" he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. "I've tried to stay away. I've tried to ignore it, but every time I look at you, every time you're near me, I can't help it. I want you." Anna's breath caught in her throat. She had heard his words, but she still couldn't quite believe them. This was Oliver Moretti, the man who had everything. Why would he want her? And more importantly, why couldn't she bring herself to push him away? "I don't want to want you," she whispered, the words slipping out before she could stop them. "But I do." Oliver's eyes darkened with something that resembled pain. For a moment he stood there, frozen, as if trying to understand the weight of her confession. Then, slowly, he closed the distance between them, his hands resting gently on her shoulders. "We can't keep pretending, Anna," he said softly. "We can't keep pretending that nothing's happening between us." His touch sent a shiver down her spine, and for the first time she let herself feel it, the warmth of his hands, the undeniable pull between them. She wanted to argue, to push him away, but the truth was she didn't want to anymore. As if sensing her surrender, Oliver leaned in slowly, his lips brushing against hers once more. This time there was no hesitation, no uncertainty. It was a kiss of understanding, of surrender, and when they finally pulled away, breathless and shaken, Oliver's voice was barely a whisper. "We figure this out, Anna," he said softly. "I promise." The days following their kiss were a blur. Anna found herself walking through the mansion in a haze, her mind constantly drifting back to the stolen moments, to the intimacy they had shared. The touch of Oliver's lips on hers lingered like a burning sensation on her skin, and no matter how hard she tried to focus on her work, she couldn't escape the feeling that things between them had irrevocably changed. Oliver, for his part, seemed to be equally unsettled. There were no more quiet, lingering moments between them. When they crossed paths, it was brief, almost tense. He was the same Oliver, cold, commanding, but there was a subtle shift in his demeanor, a distance that hadn't been there before. It was as if the unspoken truth between them was now too heavy to ignore. Anna tried to bury herself in her responsibilities, but the weight of his presence in the house was undeniable. It wasn't just his proximity anymore. It was the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, the way he paused just a moment longer than necessary when their paths crossed. She knew he was waiting for her to acknowledge what had happened, to either confront it or push it aside. But Anna was afraid of what it meant for them, afraid of what it might cost her. One evening, she found herself standing in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, her thoughts swirling in 1,000 directions. She wasn't sure when it happened, but she had found herself wishing for something more than just the fleeting moments they had shared. She wanted to understand him, to know the man behind the facade,
seen glimpses of him vulnerable, uncertain, but those moments were fleeting, gone before she could hold on to them. It was then that the door opened and Oliver stepped into the room. His presence filled the space, and Anna stiffened, her heart picking up speed as he walked toward her. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her in silence, as if waiting for her to speak. "I didn't expect you to be here," Anna said, her voice a little too sharp, betraying the anxiety she felt. She immediately regretted it, but the words were out before she could stop them. Oliver didn't react to her tone. Instead, he walked over to the counter and leaned against it casually, his eyes never leaving hers. "I needed to talk to you," he said, his voice low but firm. Anna swallowed, her stomach tightening. She could feel the gravity of the moment pressing in on her, and she knew what was coming, the question that had been hanging between them since that night. What now? "I think we need to talk too," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside. Oliver's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but he didn't move. "About what happened between us." Anna nodded slowly. She had known this moment would come, but that didn't make it any easier. She set the spoon down, wiping her hands on a towel as she turned to face him fully. "Oliver, she started, but he cut her off. "No," he said, his voice almost commanding. "Don't say it. Don't pretend like it didn't happen." Anna felt a pang in her chest. He was right. She had been trying to pretend, trying to convince herself that it was just a moment of weakness, a mistake that could be forgotten. But it wasn't, and she couldn't keep lying to herself or to him. "Then what do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Oliver took a deep breath, pushing off from the counter and stepping closer to her. The space between them was small, but it felt like an eternity. He was so close now that Anna could feel the heat radiating from him, could smell the faint scent of his cologne. "We figure it out," he said quietly, his gaze softening just slightly. "Together?" Anna looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She'd always been careful, always kept her emotions locked away, but with Oliver, everything was different. She didn't know if she was ready to let go of the control she had held onto for so long, but there was something in his eyes, a sincerity that made her question everything she had built. "You're not afraid of this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Of what it might mean for us?" Oliver's lips curved into a small wry smile, though there was no humor in it. "I'm afraid of a lot of things, Anna, but I'm not afraid of you." Anna's breath caught. His words, simple as they were, struck her in a way she hadn't expected. The man who had built walls around himself, who had made it clear he didn't need anyone. He was afraid too, but he was willing to take the risk with her. "I don't know what I'm doing," she confessed, the words escaping her before she could stop them. "But I know that I can't just ignore this. I can't pretend that nothing's happening between us." Oliver reached out, his hand resting on hers, grounding her. His touch was warm, and for a moment Anna let herself feel it, let herself feel him. "We won't ignore it," he said softly. "We'll take it one step at a time, but we'll figure this out together." As the words sank in, Anna felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but for the first time she felt like she wasn't alone in this. Maybe, just maybe, they could find a way to make it work. Oliver's thumb traced small circles on the back of her hand, and Anna closed her eyes, letting herself breathe for the first time in days. The weight of the moment lingered, but it no longer felt like something that might break her. It felt like something that might just be worth fighting for. The days after their conversation were strange. A quiet understanding settled between Anna and Oliver, a fragile truce that neither of them had expected, but both were willing to honor for now. There were no more intense moments like the kiss that had ignited something between them, no more stolen glances that said too much. They were careful, circumspect, almost distant. But the distance was not from lack of desire. It was from an unspoken agreement that neither of them was ready to acknowledge. Anna returned her routine, focusing on her tasks as if nothing had changed. She threw herself into the duties that had once been her escape. Trying to ignore the whispers of longing that still danced at the edges of her mind, she told herself that she had made the right decision. They couldn't afford to get lost in what was becoming more than just an attraction. The consequences of giving in to their desires were far too great. Oliver, on the other hand, was a constant presence. Though they maintained a semblance of professionalism, there was a weight to his gaze whenever he passed her, a weight that suggested his mind was never far from their shared moments. He didn't ask questions, didn't push for more, but Anna knew him well enough by now to see the tension beneath his composed exterior. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows across the grand hallway of the mansion, Anna was wiping down a countertop when Oliver walked in. His presence seemed to fill the room, and though they had shared countless moments in this house, this one felt different. The air between them was thicker now, charged with something neither of them could ignore. "Oliver," Anna said, his voice low, almost hesitant. It was the first time he had used her name in weeks. She turned to face him, surprised by the change in his tone. His expression was unreadable, but there was a sharpness in his gaze, a quiet intensity that made her stomach flutter. She had never seen him like this, vulnerable, uncertain, almost human. "Yes, Mr. Morty," she replied, the formality of the address slipping out of her mouth before she could stop it. She had always tried to maintain distance, but today it felt more like a barrier than a shield. Oliver gave a small, almost imperceptible smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "How are you?" he asked, his voice gentle in a way that caught her off guard. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. It was as if he were asking more than just about her well-being. He was asking about her, about everything, about them. "I'm fine," Anna replied, her voice steady, though she could feel the lie sitting on her tongue. "I'm just doing my job." There was a pause, and Oliver took a step closer, his eyes still locked on hers. "I know what you're doing, Anna, but I want to know what you're feeling." Anna's breath caught in her throat. His words were simple, but they felt like an accusation. She wasn't sure if he was asking because he genuinely cared or if he was simply trying to understand what had changed between them. Either way, she couldn't bring herself to tell him the truth. She couldn't let him see how much she was struggling with the weight of their connection. "I'm feeling fine," she said again, her voice clipped. "I'm just doing what I need to do." Oliver's gaze hardened, the tension in his posture growing more apparent. He was not used to being dismissed, not by anyone, least of all her. But Anna couldn't let him get too close, couldn't let him see how vulnerable she really was. "You're lying," he said, his voice dropping an octave. The words were quiet, but they held a finality that made Anna's pulse quicken. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of their unspoken emotions pressing in on them. Anna felt the familiar urge to pull away, to retreat into the safety of her role, but something in Oliver's eyes kept her rooted to the spot. There was no anger in his gaze, no judgment, just an intense, searching curiosity. "I'm not lying," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she believed it anymore. "I'm just trying to keep my distance." "From me?" Oliver asked softly, his voice almost pained. Anna nodded, the action almost automatic. She couldn't let herself get too close. She couldn't afford to be another woman who got lost in his world. He was a billionaire, a man who could have anything and anyone. What was she to him but a distraction, a brief moment of temptation? But Oliver took another step forward, closing the gap between them. His hand reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that almost made her falter. "Anna," he murmured, his voice filled with a kind of quiet resolve that made her chest tighten. "I'm not asking you to give in to anything. I'm not asking you to change. I just want you to stop pretending that you don't feel what I feel." The sincerity in his words
hit her like a physical blow. She had been so focused on keeping her distance, on maintaining control, that she had forgotten to listen to what her heart was saying. Maybe Oliver didn't want to control her. Maybe he just wanted her to be honest. "I'm scared," she confessed, before she could stop herself. The words were raw, vulnerable, and they slipped out like a confession. A weight lifted from her chest. Oliver's expression softened, and he took another step closer. This time, there was no distance between them. He was close enough that Anna could feel the heat of his body, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "You're not the only one," he said quietly, "but I'm not going anywhere, Anna. I'm here, and I'm not going to let you push me away." For a moment there was silence. The world outside seemed to fall away, and all that remained was the quiet hum of their shared presence.
Anna didn't know what this meant, what this moment would lead to, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't feel the need to fight it. She didn't feel the need to run. "I'm not going to push you away," she whispered, her voice shaky but sincere. Oliver reached for her hand, his touch gentle, as if he was afraid she might pull away again, but she didn't. And in that moment, Anna knew that their story wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The atmosphere in the mansion seemed to have shifted, as if the walls were breathing with the growing tension between Anna and Oliver. Although words weren't being spoken, the silent understanding between them was becoming increasingly evident. They could no longer ignore what was happening, nor the emotions that were intertwining between them like threads of an inevitable destiny. Anna knew her heart was becoming vulnerable. She felt the attraction to Oliver, yes, but there was something more, something deep and terrifying. She was falling in love with him, and it scared her, not just because he was a powerful, arrogant, and distant man, but also because she knew that she, as a mere maid, could never be part of his world. He was the billionaire, and she just a regular woman who had been hired to serve. Yet she couldn't pull away from him. The conversations, the furtive glances, the moments of kindness that he revealed from time to time, all of that made her question the barriers she had built to protect herself. Oliver wasn't the man she had initially judged. He had a complexity, a humanity that she couldn't ignore. But one thing was clear. If they were going to continue, they needed to face the differences between their worlds. They couldn't just move forward as if nothing had changed. The challenges ahead would be too great to ignore. That night, Oliver called her to a conversation in the office. Anna hesitated before entering. What did he want now? There was a restlessness in his expression, something she couldn't decipher. When she entered, he was seated behind the large wooden desk, the soft light from the lamp casting shadows on his serious face. "Anna," Oliver said, his voice low, almost uncertain. It wasn't a request for confirmation, but a question asked with a tone of unease that surprised Anna. She looked at him, feeling a wave of emotion rush through her body. "Yes," she replied, her voice trembling slightly but steady. "I know." Oliver stood up from the chair and walked over to her, his steps smooth and calculated, as if he too were weighing his words carefully. "I'm not an easy man, Anna," he said sincerely, his voice soft. "You know that. I'm complicated, and what we have, it won't be simple." Anna took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the responsibility on her shoulders. She looked at him, trying to decipher her own feelings, the confusion and desire swirling inside.
Her chest. "I don't know if I can, Oliver," she finally replied. "I want to, but I don't know if we can either," he interrupted, his voice now softer, but filled with a silent pain. "But Anna, I'm willing to try." She felt a wave of emotions wash over her. Fear, love, certainty. But for the first time, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt courage, because despite the difficulties, there was something real between them, something worth risking. She looked at him, finally without the barrier she had built around her heart. "I'm willing to try too, Oliver," she said firmly. And in that moment, their future, with all its challenges and uncertainties, seemed a little clearer. It wouldn't be easy, but for some reason, they both knew it would be the only thing that made sense. The days that followed their conversation were quiet, almost unbearably so. The mansion seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for something to happen, for the tension between Anna and Oliver to either break or blossom. Each time they crossed paths, there was a charged silence in the air, an unsaid promise of change that neither of them knew how to fulfill. Anna spent her days in a blur of routine, her thoughts constantly drifting back to that moment in Oliver's office. She had told him she was willing to try,
But was she truly ready? The weight of the decision she had made sat heavily on her shoulders, and every passing hour seemed to bring more doubts than clarity. Oliver, too, appeared distant. The usual confident air he carried had dimmed somewhat. He was no longer the aloof, seemingly unbothered man he had once been. There was a quiet longing in his eyes whenever they met, a vulnerability she hadn't noticed before. It was as if the walls around him were beginning to crack, and Anna couldn't decide if she should push through them or step back. One evening, as Anna was leaving the kitchen after a long shift, she was surprised to find Oliver waiting for her in the hallway. His presence was a rare one outside of the usual business meetings or casual exchanges during dinner. This was different. There was something more intimate in the way he stood there, leaning against the wall, waiting for her. "Dana," he said, his voice softer than usual. "Can we talk?" She hesitated, uncertain. "Isn't it late, Oliver? We should both be resting." "I'm not tired," he replied, pushing off the wall and stepping closer. His gaze softened as he took in her features, his expression unreadable. "I can't stop thinking about what you said about us." The words hung in the air between them, charged with the weight of their shared history and the promise of something more. Anna swallowed, feeling her pulse quicken. "Oliver, we've already talked about this. I don't know how this will work. I'm not sure I'm strong enough to keep fighting against everything, against what we both know is impossible." He stepped closer, his proximity overwhelming, but his voice remained steady. "And I'm telling you that I can't ignore what's happening between us. I know it's not going to be easy. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm willing to fight for it. Fight for you." Her breath caught in her throat. "But why? Why me, Oliver?" He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes deep with sincerity. "Because you're the one who makes me feel something real, something I've never felt before, and I can't just walk away from that. I won't." Anna's heart raced, her emotions a whirlwind of confusion and yearning. She had never seen him this open, this vulnerable. It was as if the walls he had so carefully constructed were finally crumbling, and in their place stood a man who wasn't afraid to admit that he too was scared of the future. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to do this," Anna whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I can't ignore what I feel for you either." Oliver reached out gently, cupping her face in his hands. "Then don't. Don't ignore it. Let's face everything together, no matter how difficult it may seem. I promise I won't let you go." In that moment, Anna felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It was terrifying, yes, this unknown path they were about to walk together. But at the same time, it felt right. For the first time, she realized that the fear she had been holding on to for so long was no longer as powerful as the desire to be with him. She had made her choice, and now there was no turning back. "I'm scared, Oliver," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I know," he replied softly, "but we'll face it together." With that, he leaned down and kissed her, a kiss that held all the unspoken words, the promises, and the hope for the future. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, a step into the unknown that neither of them could have anticipated, but both were now willing to embrace. The days that followed their conversation were full of an unspoken tension, a fragile hope that both Anna and Oliver held on to, despite the many uncertainties that lingered in the air. They knew they were standing at a precipice, one that could either lead to a future they'd never imagined or to a heart-wrenching fallback into the reality they both wanted to escape. And the decision to move forward was not an easy one. Every moment with Oliver, every gesture seemed to deepen her attachment to him, yet also intensified her fear of what was to come. Could she really build a life with him? Could they break through the boundaries of their different worlds? She had never imagined her life would take such a turn. A maid falling in love with a billionaire? It seemed absurd, but now it felt like the only truth she could trust. Oliver, on the other hand, was no longer the arrogant, untouchable man he once was. The man who had once hidden behind his wealth, power, and coldness was now laid bare before her, vulnerable, sincere, and willing to fight for a chance at happiness. His transformation was evident, but so was the weight of the responsibility he carried. His world was full of expectations, and Anna wasn't sure how they could ever carve out a space for just the two of them. One afternoon, Oliver called Anna into his office again. The call had been abrupt, and Anna couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as she walked toward the room. It was a feeling she had grown familiar with in the past few days, this constant undercurrent of unease, knowing that a decision was looming over them, but not knowing which way it would go. When she entered, Oliver was standing by the large window, looking out at the sprawling gardens beyond. He didn't turn around immediately, but she could feel his presence, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on the room. "Anna," he said, his voice carrying a mixture of determination and hesitation. "There's something I need to tell you." Her pulse quickened. She couldn't tell if this was the moment when everything would change or if it would be yet another conversation that left them both hanging in the balance. "I've been thinking," he continued, finally turning to face her, "about everything. About us. About how we can't keep pretending that the world doesn't matter, that the expectations don't exist. But I also know that I can't live in this world without you anymore. You've become everything to me, and I'm willing to sacrifice whatever I have to make this work." Anna's breath caught in her throat. "Oliver, you can't." "I can," he interrupted, stepping toward her. "I've spent my entire life hiding behind my wealth, my power, my status. But none of that matters if I don't have you. I know it's not going to be easy, and I don't know exactly how we'll make this work, but I'm not going to lose you. I can't." For a moment, Anna was speechless. She had known he cared for her, but hearing him express it so openly, without reservation, was overwhelming. Her heart raced and her thoughts spun in circles. This wasn't just about love anymore. It was about their futures, their lives, their willingness to take a leap of faith together. "I don't want to lose you either, Oliver," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "But I don't know how we can make this work. There's so much at stake. My whole life, everything I've known. It's all so different from your world." Oliver reached for her hand, gently pulling her closer. "We'll make our own world, Anna. One that's ours, and no one else's. I'll do whatever it takes to prove to you that I'm willing to fight for us, for you." The sincerity in his voice, the raw honesty in his eyes, made her heart ache. She had spent so long protecting herself, building walls around her emotions, but now with Oliver standing before her, asking her to trust him, she couldn't deny that the walls were crumbling. "I'm scared, Oliver," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared of losing myself in all of this, of losing the person
I've always been." He cued her face in his hands, his touch gentle and reassuring. "You won't lose yourself. I'll never ask you to change who you are. I just want you to be with me, to let me show you what's possible when we're together." Anna felt tears well up in her eyes as she looked up at him. The vulnerability, the hope in his gaze. It was more than she had ever imagined. She had come into this relationship expecting nothing more than a fleeting connection, but now she realized that this was something real, something worth fighting for. With a deep breath, she nodded. "Okay, Oliver, let's take that leap together." And with those words, they both knew that their lives were about to change forever. It wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges, and the road ahead would be uncertain. But for the first time, they were both willing to face it together. Weeks passed after Anna and Oliver's decision to take a leap of faith together. The mansion, once a place of silence and distance, was now filled with a new energy. The unspoken understanding between them had shifted into something more tangible, something that felt both terrifying and beautiful. But the world outside the mansion hadn't stopped turning, and the weight of their decision was beginning to take its toll. Anna found herself adjusting to the changes, slowly.
She was no longer just the maid of the house. She had become something more to Oliver. But it wasn't easy. There were whispers, looks, and judgments from the people who worked with her in the house, from those who had known her as nothing more than a servant. Some were kind, others disapproved, and a few openly skeptical of the relationship that was forming between her and their employer. Oliver, too, felt the strain. His business dealings became more complicated as his personal life began to spill into his professional one. He found himself questioning everything he had built, every decision he had made up to that point. His relationship with Anna was no longer something he could keep hidden in the shadows. The press had started to take notice of the time they were spending together, and soon rumors were circulating. One afternoon, while they were having lunch together in the dining room, the phone rang, breaking the silence. Oliver answered quickly, his expression darkening as he listened to the voice on the other end. "Anna," he said, his voice grave, after hanging up the phone, "I need to take care of something. The press is beginning to catch wind of us, and it's becoming a problem." Anna felt a chill run down her spine. She had known the risks of their relationship, but seeing the strain on Oliver's face made it feel all too real. "Oliver, what's going to happen?" He looked at her with a mix of determination and regret. "I'll handle it. You don't need to worry. But we can't keep avoiding the inevitable. The world isn't going to just accept this." Anna looked down at her hands, clenching them in her lap. It was hard not to feel like an outsider, like an intruder in Oliver's world. But she had promised to fight for them, for him. The question was Oliver willing to fight for her, even when the whole world seemed against them? The next few days were a whirlwind. Oliver took steps to address the rumors that had started to circulate. He gave a public statement confirming their relationship, and in the media's eyes, the scandalous romance between the billionaire and his maid became the talk of the town. The press didn't hold back, focusing on every aspect of their lives, their background, and questioning the legitimacy of their love. But through it all, Anna stood by Oliver. She refused to let the world dictate their relationship, to let the opinions of others ruin what she knew was real between them. She had been afraid before, but now she was determined. She loved him, and nothing, no matter how cruel the world could be, was going to take that away from her. One evening, after a particularly harsh article had been published, Anna found herself standing on the balcony, looking out over the gardens. Oliver joined her, his presence quiet but comforting. "We've made it this far, Anna," she said, her voice steady, "and I'm not backing down now. Not from you, not from us." Oliver smiled, a look of admiration and love in his eyes. He took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "I couldn't be prouder of you, Anna.
You've shown me what strength really is." The next morning, Oliver called a press conference, not just to address the rumors, but to make a bold statement about their future. Standing side by side, he publicly declared that he was committed to Anna, not just as his partner, but as the woman he loved. "People will judge," he said to the cameras, "but I know what I feel, and that's what matters. I've spent my life trying to protect everything, trying to control everything. But I've learned that love isn't something you control. It's something you fight for." Anna's heart swelled with pride in that moment. With Oliver standing by her side, the weight of all their struggles, all the sacrifices, seemed worth it. They had fought for each other, and now they were going to build a future together. The months that followed were not without their challenges. There were still moments of doubt, moments when they both questioned if they were truly ready for everything that came with being in the public eye. But as time passed, the world slowly began to accept their love. The media's initial skepticism turned into fascination, and Oliver's status as a billionaire began to shift in the public's eyes, not just as a wealthy businessman, but as a man who had found something priceless. Anna, too, found herself growing in ways she never imagined. She wasn't just the woman behind the billionaire anymore. She was her own person, someone with strength, resilience, and the ability to love deeply. She had faced her fears and stepped into a life she never expected, and now she was finally finding her place in the world. Oliver and Anna's relationship blossomed into something that wasn't just about love. It was about partnership. They supported each other, leaned on each other, and proved to the world that they were stronger together than apart. Their love was no longer a scandal. It was a symbol of what could happen when two people, no matter their backgrounds, decided to take a chance on each other. And as they stood together, looking out at the life they were building, they knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. There would always be challenges, always be obstacles, but they had each other. And that, in the end, was all that mattered. We loved having you here. Share in the comments what you thought of the story and how we can make it even better next time.